Let's make a start, shall we? This is going to be purely foundational, so I apologize if anyone has the information already. I always think it's nice to just brush up on some basics anyway. It just makes the learning a little bit easier in the future so that you haven't missed anything. So I'm going to start right from the beginning. First things first, these 5 lines we call a stave. So I'm going to draw it on here. That thing entirely is called a stave. Just nice, simple start. Now, I'm sure you've all seen this. You have to mind my beautiful drawings. These are our clefs. Now, clef actually translates or comes from the word key. So it's just signifying what, when I see that clef, it actually means it will change how the lines and the spaces are notated. And I'll explain that a little bit later as we get into the actual notes themselves. So here we have the treble clef, bass clef. Everyone can hear everything so far?
Yeah.
Questions, queries, quandrels? Awesome. We actually also call the treble clef the G clef. And I'm going to explain as to why. And we call the F clef the bass clef. Oh, sorry, the bass clef, the F clef, other way around. So the reason that is because this treble clef actually centers around the G line, and the G line is the second from the bottom. Okay, so note that the bottom is here. I know it sounds probably a bit common sense, but when I talk about the bottom, I am talking about the lowest line, and when I'm talking about the top, highest line. Now, the second from the bottom, this note here is a G. Okay, we'll get into note names in a second, but the main point that I want to make is that this creates a little crosshair. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. This creates a little crosshair with the G line. So whenever you see a treble clef, I'll try bring something up. Bit of Frozen 2. Aisha, do you love Frozen 2?
Oh, she doesn't.
No? Sure, that backfired.
It deprived from videos.
What about the first one? You thought she made too much character development in the second film. Jesus. So, look, we don't have to play the music, Aisha. It's quite fine. So, this is a poor example because it's quite bad quality. But the treble clef circles around the second line from the bottom, and that's the G line. Does that make sense for everyone? Any questions about that? It's just a reference point. So as long as you know it's a G clef, that's a G line. It means that when you, if all is lost and you don't know what notes they are, just come back to the second line from the bottom. Now, this guy is called the F clef because this dot and this dot is above and below the second line from the top, okay? Noting that this is the top and this is the bottom, okay? And that line is the F. That's an F. Any questions on that? I'll come back to our... So that's all good and well. Very happy with that. This guy is an F. So let's talk about the notes. The notes themselves, they are 7. 7 individual letters. And of course, we'll get into the notes in between the notes. But this is a cycle. So when something's a cycle or a loop, it's just going to repeat indefinitely. Okay, so A to G. And then when we get to G, it's just going to go again. Okay. Okay, and if we're doing our alphabet, Aisha, what would generally come after G? It's a bit silly that there's no H, isn't it? So, but in the musical alphabet, it goes A to G. And instead, we don't go to H. We actually just start back at A again. And it's going to go indefinitely throughout. For example, on the piano. So it's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. And that's just going to keep going, okay? Just got my complimentary teacher coffee right here. Okay, so when we're looking at the stave, notes can only fall on lines and spaces, okay? So I've got a line here, and I've got a space here. Those are the only places that notes can be occupied. Nowhere in between, nowhere elsewhere. It's just lines and spaces. Okay, there's nothing in between the lines, nothing in between the spaces. When we're actually plotting notes on the lines and the spaces, we're moving through the alphabet through the cycle. So I'll explain that a little bit better. This guy is a G. He's a different color. So if we've got the treble clef, this is a G. Now, when we're moving to the top of the stave, we're moving up through the alphabet. So if any notes that move up are going to cycle through the alphabet, okay? So G here, and who can tell me what this note will be?
A.
A, cool. You guys already know. It's great. So as I said, lines and spaces, there's nothing in between. So just as a line is next to a space, that's the same as saying a G is next to an A. Okay, so they're adjacent, they're next door neighbors, they're having a good time, they're good friends. It's all good and well. The next note is going to be a B.
B.
Correct. This guy. Sorry, I just gave it away. This one?
D.
D. This guy?
A.
E. And the last one?
F.
F. Cool. So can we see the pattern? We see the cycle between the letters? Yep. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F. They're going to keep going. Now, we do run out of lines, but we can create magical lines, but we'll talk about them later. They're definitely not called magical lines, but we'll touch on them later. Now, when I move down, I'm moving backwards through that alphabetic sequence, okay? So I'm moving down towards the bottom of the stave, and I'm going to move backwards through that alphabet. So I've got G here. What note is this?
F.
F. This guy?
E.
E. This one.
B. And C.
So it's a D. Yeah. And we'll touch on C because this is the sort of magical lines that I was referring to before. We'll touch on that in a second. Now, although the lines stop, there is definitely still a space above and below the lines. Okay. And if I want to, I can draw in more lines. The thing is, we only want to, for legibility's sake, we just want to keep it at 5 lines. But as there are infinite letters, infinite notes, infinite pitch, there are infinite lines. But for, I guess, legibility and for reading and whatnot, we only limit it to 5 lines. But if you really wanted to, you could imagine that lines just keep going. Is everyone clear on that? Okay.
Mhm.
But instead, we just show a temporary line to show that the notes keep going. So that's a G, because we just come from an F to a G. This guy's an A. What's this one?
C.
C. Because,
Oh, skip one.
yeah, that was a tricky question. Make sure you're awake on this Monday afternoon. We skipped a space. So because we skipped a space, we skipped B. And then we went to a line to C. Alrighty. Now, of course, that's all good and well. Okay, so that's with reference to knowing that this is a G, and we can work it out from there. Of course, that takes a bit long, and we want to be able to work out the notes a little bit quicker. And this comes back to probably, I'm going to say high school years, but that doesn't apply to everyone here. But every good boy deserves fruit and face. So these are our acronyms that we're going to use to remember the notes on the stave. Instead of having to remember that that is a G. Okay, so that's just a one way. It's just a nice way to go, okay, that's a G. Cool, I can work out any note from that note if I want to. For whatever reason, you forget the acronym, which defeats the purpose of an acronym, I guess. So, well, that's where practice comes in, right? The acronyms apply to the lines and to the spaces, and they work from the bottom up. Okay, they work from this. So when you're applying the acronym, make sure you're doing it from the bottom to the top. The first one is every good boy deserves fruit. And please, if you wish, you can create your own. I encourage it. This is just gone through the test of time, really. So I was implying that face actually stands for something, but it really doesn't. It's just space. Face rhymes with space, and it's just a nice way to remember what notes are in the spaces. So every good boy deserves fruit. Every good boy deserves fruit. Is everyone clear on that? Cool. Face. F-A-C-E. Questions?
No.
No. So you can get any piece of music, apply that acronym or mnemonic device so you can remember the notes and easily read what the notes are. And of course, if we look, we can go E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. Okay? So what I'm pointing out there is that it's just following the cycle, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F. There's no sort of illusion there. It's just going through the alphabet. So they're the notes for the treble clef. Once you know those, you know them. They don't sort of miraculously change. They're going to be those notes for the treble clef for the rest of your life. So let's look at bass clef, shall we? We already know that this is an F. What note is this?
G.
G. Rockstar. What about this?
A.
E. So, same principle for the treble clef, right? Same principle either way, whatever clef it is. Okay, there's more than two clefs, but we only worry about two right now. So as I move up the stave, which is to say to the top, I go from F to G, and then I go to A, I go to B, I go to C. Okay? As I move back, I'm going to go back through the alphabet. F, E, D, C, E, A. Any questions on that?
No.
So you'll notice that the permutation or the combination, the pattern is the same, of course. Just the reference point is different. Okay, so the notes are going to be different to what you read on the treble clef to the bass clef, not only due to their octave, but actually how you read the notes themselves. So let's just touch on the acronym, and just for those playing at home, that C, these C's are the same. So it's what we refer to as middle C, which is about 3 to 4 octaves from the left of the piano, generally referred to as C3 or C4. That's the convergence point. So generally we'll see the treble clef above the bass clef, and when we see that C, I haven't really found another way of saying that, that pitch, that note is exactly the same as if I was to draw the C and a bass clef, okay? It's just for whatever reason, wherever the notes come from, we draw it on the bass clef. But the actual sound of it is the same, and that where we place it on the instrument is the same. It's just a side point there. Now, the acronym we use, good boys deserve fruit always. Serve fruit always. Now, if you look at our first one, every good boy deserves fruit. Good boy deserves fruit always. All we're doing is we're more or less using the same acronym. There's a weird way of explaining it. All you need to do is, for the lines, remember every good boy deserves fruit always, and know that when you're starting with the treble clef, you're doing every good boy deserves fruit. And when you're doing the bass clef, you're doing good boy deserves fruit always. Okay, so it's just know that they're sort of rooted in the same acronym. Any questions on that? Happy chaps. All right. Ooh, no, that's wrong, Daniele. Good boys deserve fruit always. Okay. And all cows eat grass. This one actually stands for something. Of course, there'll be a plethora of different ones you can pull from. It's really the path of least resistance. Your call. And when I started learning, for those that have listened to my heartstring stories, I just remembered it as Gecko. I don't know why, it just worked for my brain, and But of course, that's probably going to screw your brains up because it actually goes the other way around. But now you remember it because of my weird stories. So any questions on the note names for the bass clef? Rock stars. Okay. So. You guys are plowing through. It's really nice. Let's check my notes from last week. I just want to touch a little bit more on ledger notes. Meanwhile, if you need to improve your reading, I would encourage you to get an app called Tenuto, and it's going to it has little note identification. I think it's online. I think it's on a browser as well. Probably a few dollars. I can't remember, but this is actually how I learned my theory. The website's called musictheory.net. They kind of that the URL's interchangeable now, but yeah, I learned that. Yeah, that's just how I started my journey. And the website's very comprehensive, very visual, and they've got these great exercises. And all you have to do is just yell out the note and then call it. Very helpful, very good for just improving your sight reading. And I'd also encourage you to get any piece of sheet music and apply it for that. Okay. So when we're reading music, generally, so as I said, this guy is a stave. When it's combined by a vertical line, when the staves are combined vertically, but just by a thin line, we call that a system. Now, when something's combined by a system, it actually means that the events occur all at the same time. Okay, so this probably sounds a bit straightforward, but when we're playing the piano and you look at a piece of piano music, those lines are going to be connected because it's implying that the right hand plays and the left hand plays at the same time. Now, for those that are looking at some musical theater pieces, generally you'll see one extra stave. See if I can move this. Yes, amazing. Always learning.
What app is that?
This is called Fourscore.
Oh, that is Fourscore. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's the best. I stand by it. So let's say your vocal stave is here. Stuff happens here, stuff happens there, things happen there. So it's all connected by this vertical line. Just make it pretty for you guys as well. Pretty-ish. Those events occur at the same time, and this will make sense once we start looking at sheet music. But the piano stave is commonly has a little, we call it a brace. Okay, so semitone is the distance between any adjacent note on the piano. Now, any adjacent note is directly next door, okay? It doesn't matter if they're black or white, all right? So when I sharpen something, I raise it by a semitone. When I flatten something, I lower it by a semitone. C, and then C sharp, okay? E sharp, okay? That's quite an important point. That's a semitone apart. That is an E sharp is just an F. When I flatten a C, I bring it down to B. When I sharpen a G, I bring it up to the right by black note. Any questions on that?
No.
All right, I'm going turbo speed. Music theory, turbo speed. So there's your first scale. Chromatic scale. For those playing at home and want to learn it via the piano, use the first finger. So just FYI, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Use the first finger, use the third finger. And your junction point, when you go to the E to the F, you actually roll over to the second finger, and it's going to be hard to explain. But anyway, so we go C. I'm going to say the fingering. So 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 1, 3, 1. So every time we hit the white notes, we go to the second finger. It's just nice to, if you guys want to practice that and get good at it, it's always fun. Yeah, there's your chromatic scale. Very first scale, okay? So those playing at home, a scale is just a sequence of notes. There are so many scales, and hopefully if you guys stick around, we can touch on All of them. Chromatic notes, chromatic scale is just made up of semitones. There are 12 notes in total in the Western music series. Okay, 12 notes, 12 scales. There's going to be a chromatic scale technically built off all those 12 notes. I've just started off on C, but I could start it on E, I could start it on G, but they're going to contain the same building blocks, I guess. The next scale, major scale. Yeah, I'm sure you remember this. Tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. So 2 semitones make up a tone. And the first major scale that you're going to learn is... So C to D is a tone, D to E is a tone, E to F is a semitone, F to G is a tone, G to A is a tone, A to B is a tone, B to C is a semitone. Any questions on that? Awesome, cool. So I'll just really quickly draw it out for you. I don't know why I underlined it. That's weird. So just C major. So each of these notes have a number associated with them. No, we never worry about the 8 because that's just an octave up. We call them scale degrees. Okay, the most important scale degree is the tonic and the dominant. Okay, as we move into some jazz theory at some point in space and time, which will happen eventually, I promise. For those interested, we'll have 1 and 5. They are very important, not only in jazz theory, just in Western music as a whole. The 5 is drawn to the 1 because of science. And when we hear a song, this is a 5 chord, and then of course we want to come back to the 1. So what I'd encourage you to do is actually familiarize yourself with as many scales as possible if you really want to become quite proficient at just music, I guess. But in order to do that, your next scale that you're going to build is going to be the 5th note of the current scale that you're playing. So C major. You're actually going to build the next scale off G. Now, of course, if we actually do our tone, tone, semitone, etc., we'll find that that should go to an F sharp. And then you're going to build a scale off the 5th note of G. Now, what you start to realize that each 5th has the same notes as the scale prior. It's just one note varies. So in a way, you don't have to think about it so much. So C major, G major is going to have pretty much exactly the same notes as C major. It's just one little difference. And the difference is going to be the 7th note. Now, if I play all those notes for D major, the 7th note, okay? For those playing at home, so I'm just going up by 5th. A to E, E to B, B to F sharp, and if you really want to challenge yourself, just keep going. F to C sharp, C to G sharp, which technically becomes flats at that point. That becomes an A flat when we talk about the circle of 5ths. How are we doing so far? Sort of.
Slow on this one because I think that maybe. So you're saying you add
I'll put on the brakes.
You add a sharp, or you add a every time you do the next 5th.
That's the sort of consequence. I'd still encourage you to actually go tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone to actually know the scale. But it's just a good way of familiarizing yourself with the scales rather than just picking scales at random. You know, you could do a C major and then you could do a C sharp major scale. But of course, C and C sharp is actually the most different to each other. So it's just to kind of get an idea of, I'm going to build my C major scale. And yes, you're right in saying that. And then I'm going to build my G major scale. The rule is, if I build it from the C major, is exactly what you said. I'm just going to use the C major notes, but I'm actually going to sharpen the 7th note. It's just a little trick, really. It's just going to kind of speed you up a fraction. Because, yep.
Oh, sorry. When you do that, when do you know when to flip to flats? Is that once you reach the scale with all of the sharps in it?
And so I guess this is where the theory comes in. When you go to play it, there are neither sharps or flats. They're just the notes on the piano. When you write it, that's where you have to ask the question, is it sharps or flats? Because if I play a G sharp major, play an A flat major, they're exactly the same.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of this comes down to how do I write it? How does it look? Okay. Now, and that's where we start to get into the circle of fifths.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So, and this is the distinction. Sometimes we don't always apply the distinction of like, oh, actually, it's just going to sound the same. It just looks different for whatever reason. Is this going to work if I just do this? Yes. And then I'm going to go, hopefully, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 2, 2. This should just be a clock face, really. C major up the top, 0 sharps, 0 flats. It's just the white notes. Happy chaps?
Mm-hmm.
Love how you should just chilling out.
They know all this. That's why.
Yeah. They're wizards.
Sorry,
Like, tell me
God,
something
that.
difficult. I want jazz. G to D, D to A, E to A to E. Let me move this guy. Not E again. F sharp. Now, as we come down here, that's when it starts to change. So this is what we call an enharmonic. When a note has a different equivalent, it's referred to as an enharmonic. Just as like someone can have a nickname. So a C can also be referred to as a B sharp, but we commonly refer to it as a C. So consequently, we can say C sharp here, and we can also say F sharp. Oh, sorry. We can say G flat here. I just become very conscious of the time. I'll wrap up shortly, guys. And I think in the future, I'll probably put the intermediate in the same room because I think that just makes a bit more sense. D to A flat. And now, once we get to G to A flat, I'm just going to start. I'm going to start referring to them as flats. Mainly because the amount of flats it takes to write is less than the amount of sharps. If you draw out a G sharp major, it's going to have about 6 or 7 sharps or something like that. If you draw out an A flat major, it's just going to have 4 flats, much easier. Just to wrap up, and we'll continue with this tomorrow. I think my camera just shut down for some reason. Sorry, guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can still see the screen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. 2, 3, 4. Now, I just won't touch on the F sharp and the G flat just for a moment. But if I move, oh, you can see me again? Good. If I move to the right, I'm going to add a sharp. And if I move to the left, I'm going to add a flat. All right. We'll wrap up there, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more and just talk about easy ways to identify key signatures tomorrow as well. Sounds good?
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
team.
you.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can join me tomorrow so I can keep the progression going as I kind of work out what these sessions are about. So I'm not starting at the beginning all the time.
Yeah.
You guys are great.
Thanks.
I'm going to jump in and jump out and go into the next session, and I'll hopefully see you tomorrow.
Is the next link on?
It'll be on Facebook, and it will be in the email too.
Right.
So exit this one, or do we just change
Exit this one.
Okay.
All right. Bye.
And I will fix that later, I reckon. See you guys.
Bye.
I'm going to jump onto the next one, but I'll see you tomorrow.
Legend. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meredith. Bye.